Okay, so now this presentation is going to be really the introduction to the information processing section of the course, and this will be a good portion. But this will be the shortest of the lectures, and we'll go ahead and in subsequent lectures go ahead and break each component up for you. So information processing is really the portion that occurs within the human, and it's the idea that at the higher levels or some sort of within our system, we have to take the input signals that we have from our environment, kind of do some sort of analysis within our system, and then go ahead and do an output or a motor response. So that human processing component is that information processing, right? So it's the input comes in via your environment, and then you have to kind of produce some sort of desired motor response or outcome. So this is that cognitive kind of approach, and a lot of times what we're trying to do is what happens consciously or subconsciously. A lot of times we don't really think about it. It's a black box kind of concept, and so we want to talk a little bit about what we believe is happening and some of the research that goes into play with this. So if we break it down, processing can be either serial or happening one after the other, or things can be happening in parallel. So you can be doing things simultaneously at once, right? So sometimes things don't require too much, and we often talk about walking and chewing gum, right? So those are two actually different motor patterns and tasks, but we can do those in parallel, where sometimes we have to complete one task before we go on to the next. It's the idea between sequential versus simultaneous, or serial versus parallel. So think about this. Think about the old structure of a manufacturing plant, and this is where a lot of this research is going to be focused, right? Is the old manufacturing plants and why they do it. But so you have the parallel processing at a plant that talks about each individual component being assembled. You have the electronics, you have the engine, and you have the body, and then at some point, all those things kind of come together, and this is where the serial happens. You put all those final assembly pieces together, and then you go out and test drive, right? You can't test drive until all of the components have been put together into the car or the unit. So when we talk about the information processing inside of the human and what we have to do, we break it up into kind of three components, and this is a general theory, right? So there are different theories that kind of structure and identify these components a little bit differently, or they'll break them down into further components. But really what this is our reaction time. And the reaction time is representing the stimulus that comes in and how long it takes us to process that information and produce that desired outcome, right? So these three phases that we're going to talk about here really is the stimulus identification is the first one, and that's where you identify the stimuli presented, and typically it's happened because you're doing some kind of pattern recognition, and we'll talk more about what that represents going forward. Your next one is response selection. And this is the middle phase, right? So following, now you've identified that stimulus, and now it's going to take the time to decide what your response should be. And so you have a series of responses depending on how much you've been exposed to that stimulus you've identified or your experience with it, right? So I'm also watching a baseball game, and so sometimes if I'm a elite baseball player in the MLB, I've seen a lot of pitches, right? And so my response selections can be multiple different. If I'm a T-ball player, then I can't respond to different stimuli as the ball approaches me. And then the final one, you have that response programming. And this is where you translate that abstract component of the response selection, because the response selection is very abstract in its presentation. And now you're going to program it into this organized motor program and a neuromuscular program. And if you've ever taken a class from me, you hear me talk about muscle memory and what it actually isn't muscle memory. It's actually these ideas that we have these neuromuscular motor programs, and this is where you can organize those abstract programs into choosing that one.